The millionaire asked a poor blind girl for help because the letter was written in. This story interested you? Subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. On a sultry autumn evening in Birmingham, entrepreneur Robert Maxwell observed the city from his office, high up on the top floor of one of Mayfair's most luxurious buildings. At 42, he was the personification of Midland's success. He commanded a cross-border business conglomerate, but led a solitary life, marked by past decisions he preferred not to revisit. The digital clock on the glass wall read almost 8 in the evening when the intercom chimed. Daisy, his secretary for over a decade, announced with a hesitant voice that a little girl was insistent on seeing him personally. A child? At this hour? Robert frowned, irritated by the interruption. Send her away, Daisy. I don't have time for this now. Sir, she insists. Daisy's voice conveyed discomfort. She says she has a letter for you. She keeps repeating that Grandma said only he can listen. Robert stood motionless for a few seconds, intrigued by the unusual insistence. His eyes fixed on the illuminated city below, he finally sighed. All right, let her in. Minutes later, the noble wooden door opened, and a little girl of approximately 8 years old entered the office. She wore a faded coat and carried a white cane and a yellowed envelope between her small hands. Robert stood up, surprised. The girl was blind. Hello, he said, trying to soften his tone. My name is Robert Maxwell. I know, the girl replied with an unusual serenity for her age. My name is Cecilia. Grandma told me a lot about you. Robert approached cautiously, like someone unsure how to act in a situation entirely outside his meticulously planned routine. Your grandmother? Who is your grandmother, Cecilia? Grandma Constance, the girl replied simply. She passed on 3 weeks ago, but before that she asked me to deliver this to you. She said it's very important. The girl extended the envelope in the direction of Robert's voice. He took it carefully, noticing the different texture of the paper. When he opened it, he realized the content was written in Braille. I can't read this, he admitted, disconcerted. Cecilia smiled slightly. Grandma knew. She taught me the letter by heart, but she also said I should read it to you with my own fingers. She said you needed to listen with your heart, because eyes sometimes lie. Robert sat down again, inviting the girl to do the same. Then read it to me, Cecilia. The girl positioned her fingers delicately over the paper and began to read, with a calm and paused voice. Dear Robert, when this letter reaches your hands, I will have already departed. My name is Constance Oliver, and you don't know me, but I know a lot about your life. I am the mother of Julia, the woman you once loved like no one else in the world. The name hit Robert like a physical blow. Julia. It had been almost 10 years since he had heard that name pronounced, 10 years of trying to forget what he considered the greatest betrayal of his life. The girl continued, her fingers gliding smoothly over the raised marks. I have spent the last few years trying to correct a terrible mistake that destroyed my daughter's life and consequently yours. Cecilia, the girl who is now reading this letter, is your biological daughter with Julia. What? Robert stood up abruptly, startling the girl. This cannot be true. There must be some mistake. Please let me finish, Cecilia asked with disconcerting maturity. Robert sat back down, trying to organize his thoughts. For years he had lived with a diagnosis of sterility, confirmed by medical tests, and had endured the frustration of not being able to start a family. The news that he had a daughter seemed absurd. You believed you were sterile because you were deceived, Cecilia continued, reading the letter. The supposed proofs of infidelity you received in the past, photos, messages, and especially the tests that deemed you incapable of having children, were all falsified. Robert's face paled. His hands began to tremble slightly on the Italian marble table. The person responsible for this entire charade was Camille, your current partner. At the time, she used her influence to distance you from Julia, to take her place and secure a privileged position by your side. After my husband passed away, and I distanced myself from my daughter, I dedicated myself to silently investigating what had happened. I hired professionals, gathered evidence, and discovered the whole truth. The office door opened again, and a woman of approximately 50 years old entered. She wore simple but clean and well-kept clothes. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Nancy, Cecilia's social worker." "I came to pick her up." Robert stood up, still stunned. "Wait," he asked. "I need to understand what's going on." "Grandma Constance left everything documented," Nancy explained, handing a folder to Robert. "Julia is hospitalized, in serious condition at St. Jude's Hospital. The disease has progressed rapidly in recent months, and there are few options left other than an experimental treatment available in London." "Disease?" Robert's voice almost failed. "Advanced multiple sclerosis," Nancy replied seriously. Cecilia continued reading, her small fingers never hesitating. "Legally, you can assume guardianship of Cecilia, but I make a moral appeal that you do, this not merely out of obligation, but as an act of love if any feeling for Julia still remains." Robert looked at the girl. Her delicate features vaguely resembled Julia's, but there was something about her, perhaps the shape of her chin or the way she slightly tilted her head when speaking, that felt strangely familiar. Could it really be his daughter? "We can do a DNA test," Nancy suggested, as if reading his thoughts. "Grandma Constance knew you would have doubts. She had everything prepared." Robert ran a hand through the graying hair at his temples. "I need time to process all this." "Time is not a luxury Julia has," Nancy responded firmly. "And Cecilia needs stability." The girl carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. "Grandma said you're a good man. You just sometimes forget it." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. The words of the letter echoed in his mind. He remembered Julia, the only true love he had ever had. He recalled how it all ended, the anonymous photos supposedly showing her with another man, the compromising messages on her phone, and above all, the medical confirmation that he could never have children. At the time, Julia tried to explain, swore her innocence, but he, too hurt to listen, broke off their 5-year relationship. Shortly after, Camille entered his life. She was his lawyer at the time and helped him through the painful separation process. Comfort turned into attraction, and eventually they became a couple. Now, 10 years later, they lived together, though more as business partners than as lovers. The next morning, Robert arrived at the office earlier than usual. He asked Daisy to reschedule all his appointments for the day and called Arthur, his longtime lawyer and friend. "I need you to investigate something for me," he said as soon as Arthur answered, with utmost discretion. Late that afternoon, Robert drove his black Audi to St. Jude's Hospital in the eastern part of Birmingham. It was a public hospital, very different from the private clinics he frequented. On the 4th floor, he found room 412. He hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. "Come in," a female voice responded. When he opened the door, Robert saw Julia for the first time in a decade. She was lying in the hospital bed, visibly thinner, her dark hair now mixed with grey strands. Even so, he immediately recognized the brown eyes that one day made him believe in the possibility of a different life. Beside her, Cecilia was sitting in a chair, listening to an audiobook with headphones. "Robert?" The surprise in Julia's voice was evident. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he replied, still at the door, uncertain how to proceed. Cecilia removed her headphones when she heard Robert's voice. "He came," she said, smiling in her mother's direction. "Cecilia found me yesterday," Robert explained, approaching. "She gave me a letter from Grandma." "Constance?" Julia closed her eyes for an instant. "Mom never knew how to give up," she murmured. "I asked her not to do this, to leave the past in the past." "Is it true?" Robert asked directly. "About Camille? About Cecilia?" Julia looked at her daughter with tenderness. "Cecilia, darling, would you mind going to the cafeteria with Nurse Carmen? I need to talk to Robert alone." The girl nodded, picking up her cane. "Can I bring you some juice, Mommy?" "Yes, thank you, my love." When they were alone, a heavy silence filled the room. Robert noticed the various medications on the bedside table, the IV connected to Julia's arm, the evident fragility in her every movement. I never wanted you to know, Julia finally said, especially not like this, with pity. It's not pity, he replied, pulling up a chair to sit beside the bed. It's confusion, guilt. I don't know. About your question, she continued, adjusting herself in bed with some difficulty. Yes, it's true. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after we broke up. I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't answer my calls, you wouldn't reply to my messages. When I finally managed to get to your office, the secretary informed me that you had given express orders not to let me in. Robert remembered those days. The pain of betrayal was so intense that he couldn't even hear Julia's name without feeling nauseous. Camille approached me shortly after, Julia continued. She said she was there as your legal representative. She handed me an envelope with money, saying it was compensation for the inconvenience. When I refused, she threatened to file a lawsuit against me for harassment and defamation if I continued trying to contact you. I never knew about this, Robert murmured, astonished. I decided to move on. I had Cecilia alone with support only from my parents. When she was born with congenital glaucoma, I had to dedicate myself entirely to her. Even with all the surgeries and treatments, we couldn't prevent her from losing her sight at 4 years old. Robert felt the weight of each word as a silent accusation. My father passed away when Cecilia was 5. Mum never accepted that I didn't fight harder for you, that I didn't demand a paternity test. After I discovered the disease 2 years ago, she intensified her investigations on her own. Why didn't you contact me when you found out you were sick? Julia smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. Out of pride, perhaps? Or because I didn't want you to see me like this, as an obligation, a problem to solve. I preferred you to keep the memories of who I was. The door opened and Cecilia entered with a nurse. The girl carried a glass of juice which she carefully handed to her mother. You're still here, she said, turning to where she imagined Robert would be. That's good. Robert observed the interaction between mother and daughter, the tenderness in Julia's gestures, the confidence in Cecilia's movements despite her blindness. He felt something break inside him, a barrier he had kept up for years. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, standing up, and we'll talk more about everything. On his way out of the hospital, Robert received a call from Arthur. I found something, the lawyer said. The lab that did your fertility tests 10 years ago. It was shut down 8 months later for fraudulent results. The doctor who signed your report, Dr. Marcus Ashton, had his license revoked and then disappeared. And guess what? He was Camille's second cousin. Robert felt his blood run cold. Keep investigating. I want all possible evidence. Upon arriving home, he found Camille in the living room, sipping a glass of wine while reviewing documents. At 39, she remained elegant and attractive, with the same confident demeanor he had always admired. You're late, she commented, without looking up from her papers. Problems at the company. Robert poured himself a whiskey and sat on the opposite sofa. Do you know a woman named Julia Oliver? Camille's slight stiffening of the shoulders was almost imperceptible, but Robert, after years of business negotiations, knew how to recognize signs of tension. The name isn't unfamiliar, she replied with studied indifference. Why? I had an interesting visit yesterday. A blind girl named Cecilia, who claims to be my daughter. Camille finally looked up, meeting his gaze. Her face was perfectly composed, but there was something calculating in her eyes. A swindler, obviously, she said, placing her glass on the table. You know you can't have children. Funny you should mention that, Robert replied, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, because I'm starting to question a lot of things about my past. Camille stood up with a fluid movement. I'm tired. Let's talk about this tomorrow when you're thinking more clearly. Robert watched her ascend the stairs of the mansion in Belgravia, wondering how many other lies she had told over the years. He finished his drink in one gulp and picked up the phone. He needed to speak with specialists, get the best available treatment for Julia, and most importantly, get to know the girl who could be his daughter. The next morning, Robert cancelled all his appointments for the week. He drove to Arthur's office to review the information, collected overnight. The evidence was unsettling. Falsified medical documents, suspicious payments, a web of manipulations that stretched back a decade. I need a DNA test as soon as possible, Robert said. I've already arranged it, Arthur replied. A reliable lab, results in 48 hours. Meanwhile, in the modest apartment where Julia lived with Cecilia in Shoreditch, Nancy was organizing documents when the doorbell rang. It was a delivery, a bouquet of white lilies, Julia's favorite flowers, with a simple card that read only, "Forgiveness for lost time. R." Julia touched the soft petals with trembling fingers. Beside her, Cecilia smiled. "They're flowers, aren't they? I can smell the perfume." "Yes, they're lilies. How did he remember after all this time?" Grandma always said that true love isn't forgotten. It's just kept in another place in the heart. In the couple's luxurious apartment, Camille frantically searched Robert's office for clues about what he knew. She found notes about St. Jude's Hospital, Julia's doctor's name, and a card with Nancy, the social worker's, contact information. With quick movements, she photographed everything with her phone and rearranged the papers exactly as they were. As he drove through the city, Robert reflected on how his life had changed in just 48 hours. For years, he had built a business empire focused exclusively on expansion and profits. He lived a convenient relationship with Camille based on mutual interests and social appearances. He believed he had overcome Julia, the youthful mistake that almost made him abandon his ambitions for a simple life. Now he questioned everything, and at the center of this whirlwind was an 8-year-old girl who faced the world without seeing it, but who seemed to see much further than others could. He parked in front of St. Jude's Hospital. Before getting out of the car, he received a message from Arthur. "Urgent, I found something else. Someone is trying to transfer considerable funds from your offshore accounts. We need to talk." Robert frowned. Only 3 people had access to those accounts: himself, his trusted accountant, and Camille. The truth began to unravel, piece by piece, like a dark puzzle he needed to complete before it was too late. For himself, for Julia, and especially for Cecilia. In the hospital room, Julia watched the fine rain falling over Birmingham, wondering if she had done the right thing by allowing her mother to bring Cecilia closer to Robert. The girl slept peacefully in the armchair beside her, headphones playing an audio story. Her fingers still held the Braille book she was reading before falling asleep. Julia knew her time was running out. The doctors had been clear. Without the experimental treatment in London, her chances were minimal. But the treatment was expensive, far beyond her financial means. Now, with Robert back in her life, new hopes and new fears emerged. Did she still love him? Perhaps. Or perhaps she loved the memory of the man he was, not the cold businessman he had become. But above all, she loved Cecilia and would do anything to ensure her daughter had a secure future, even if it meant reopening past wounds she preferred to keep closed. Robert was about to enter the hospital when his phone rang again. It was Arthur with even more troubling news. "Robert, someone is trying to access all your confidential files. The bank transfer was just the beginning. I also detected attempts to access documents related to the merger with the Albright Group." "Block everything," Robert ordered, feeling his anger rise. "Change all passwords, security protocols, everything, and prepare the documents we discussed earlier." Upon entering Julia's room, he found her awake, watching Cecilia, who was sleeping in the armchair. "Sorry for the delay," he murmured, approaching the bed. "Some problems arose." Julia nodded. "Thank you for the flowers. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he replied, pulling up a chair to sit down. "It's the least I can do after everything." An uncomfortable silence hung between them. Robert observed Julia's face, searching for traces of the young woman he had fallen in love with years ago. Despite the illness, her gaze remained the same. Determined, proud, incapable of asking for help even when she desperately needed it. "Julia, I'd like to transfer you to Royal Crescent Hospital," he finally said. "They have one of the best neurological teams in the country." She shook her head negatively. "I don't want your charity, Robert." "It's not charity," he replied, leaning closer. "If Cecilia really is my daughter, and everything indicates she is, then you are my daughter's mother. It's my responsibility to ensure you receive the best possible treatment." "Now it's your responsibility?" Her voice took on a bitter tone. After 10 years? I didn't. No, he argued, trying to control his frustration. You yourself said you couldn't tell me. Because you didn't give me a chance. Julia's voice rose, making Cecilia stir in the armchair. She immediately lowered her tone. You didn't want to listen to me. You preferred to believe in fabricated photos and messages rather than trust the woman you planned to marry. The words hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. She was right. At the time, he was so hurt that he couldn't see beyond his own pain. You're right, he admitted after a moment. I failed you in every possible way. But now I'm here and I want to help. If not for us, then for Cecilia. Julia looked at her sleeping daughter. Her face softened. She looks like you know. She has your stubborn way. She never gives up on anything. I thought the same, Robert confessed with a slight smile. But she has your heart. Cecilia began to wake up, rubbing her eyes with her small hands. Mommy? Is someone else here? Yes, darling. Robert came to visit us again. The girl smiled, orienting herself by the sound of their voices. I dreamed of Grandma. She was smiling. Robert felt something strange in his chest, a mixture of tenderness and protection he had never experienced before. At that moment, he didn't need a DNA test to confirm what his heart already knew. Cecilia was his daughter. Cecilia, he said, approaching the armchair, I'd like to do something for you and your mother, but I need Julia to agree. What is it? The girl asked, curious. I want both of you to move to a better place, where your mother can receive proper treatment. Julia opened her mouth to protest, but Cecilia was faster. Grandma always said that pride doesn't cure illness, the girl said simply, and that refusing sincere help is as wrong as not offering it to those in need. Robert couldn't suppress a smile. Your grandmother was a wise woman, Julia sighed, defeated by her own daughter. All right, but I have conditions. First, I don't want Cecilia to know anything about our complicated past. Second, this doesn't mean you have any rights over her. And third, I don't want your pity. I accept the first two, Robert replied. As for the third, I can't promise. What I feel isn't pity, Julia, it's remorse, guilt, and the desire to fix what can still be fixed. The next morning, Dr. Paul Miller, a renowned neurologist at Royal Crescent Hospital, examined Julia's medical records in his luxurious office. The disease has progressed rapidly in recent months, he explained to Robert, who was watching him intently. But there's an experimental treatment being developed in London that has shown promising results in cases like hers. What are the chances? Robert asked. Difficult to say precisely. 60–70% chance of significant improvement in quality of life. It's not a cure, mind you, but it can drastically slow the progression of the disease. Make all the necessary arrangements, Robert ordered. Cost is not an issue. Meanwhile, in Julia's apartment, Nancy was helping Cecilia organize her belongings for the move. Are we going to Robert's house? The girl asked, carefully folding her clothes. No, darling, Nancy replied. You're going to a special clinic where your mother will receive treatment. There's a comfortable attached apartment where you'll stay. He's my father, isn't he? Cecilia's direct question caught Nancy by surprise. Why do you ask that? I heard Mommy crying last night, talking on the phone with Aunt Lucy. She said, I don't know how to tell Cecilia the truth about her father. Nancy sat on the bed beside the girl. Some truths are complicated, Cecilia. Your mother just wants to protect you. I don't need to be protected from the truth, the girl replied seriously. I prefer to know things as they are even without being able to see them. In the couple's mansion, Camille frantically watched Robert pack some clothes into a suitcase. So it's true, she asked, leaning against the doorframe. You're really going to help this woman who appeared out of nowhere with an absurd story? Robert closed the suitcase with more force than necessary. It's not an absurd story, Camille. She's my daughter. Based on what? The word of an old woman who's already dead and a girl you barely know. Camille approached, trying to touch his arm. Robert recoiled. Based on the evidence I found, falsified documents, fraudulent tests, witnesses who confirm your involvement in all of this. Camille's face paled, but she quickly regained her composure. I don't know what you're talking about. I know you tried to transfer money from my offshore accounts, he continued, staring at her. I know about your cousin, Dr. Marcus Ashton, who falsified my fertility tests. I know about the investigators you hired to fabricate evidence against Julia. I can explain, Camille tried. Don't worry, Robert interrupted. You'll have plenty of time to explain. To me, to my lawyers, and perhaps to the police. You wouldn't do that, she challenged. It would be a scandal. Your precious company would suffer. I'm willing to take the risk, he replied, picking up the suitcase. My lawyer will be in touch. I suggest you seek legal representation. On his way out of the mansion, Robert took a deep breath. The conversation with Camille had left him exhausted, but also strangely relieved. It was like removing a weight he had carried for years without realizing it. At the hospital, Julia was receiving instructions for the transfer when her childhood friend, Lucy, arrived to visit her. I can't believe he came back like that out of nowhere and you're accepting help, Lucy commented, visibly worried. I don't have much choice, Julia replied with a sigh. And it's not for me. It's for Cecilia. And do you really believe he's changed? That he won't disappear again when things get difficult? Julia looked out the window, observing the city's movement below. I don't know, Lucy, but he has the right to know his daughter, and Cecilia deserves to know who her father is. What about you two? Are there still feelings? The question remained unanswered when the room door opened, and Cecilia entered, accompanied by Nancy. The girl seemed excited. Mommy, Nancy said we're going to a place with gardens. I can smell the flowers every day. Julia smiled, exchanging a meaningful look with her friend. Yes, darling, and you'll be able to continue your music lessons too. Hours later, a private ambulance transferred Julia to St. Clair's Clinic, an excellent institution attached to Royal Crescent Hospital. Robert monitored everything closely, ensuring every detail was perfect. The apartment attached to the clinic was spacious and comfortable, with facilities adapted for Cecilia. Robert had hastily hired a specialist in accessibility for visually impaired children, ensuring the space was safe and functional for the girl. You thought of everything, Julia commented when they managed a moment alone, after Cecilia had fallen asleep in the new bedroom. I tried, Robert admitted. I'm still learning, Julia observed him intently. Why, Robert? Why are you doing all this? Because it's the right thing to do. Is that all? Robert sat in the armchair by the window, reflecting on the question. No. Also because when I look at Cecilia, I see all the possibilities I lost. All the birthdays, first days of school, bedtime stories. 10 years that won't come back. She never blamed you, Julia said softly. I always told her that her father was a good man who didn't know about her. And you? Robert asked. Did you blame me? Every day, for a long time, she confessed. Then I learned to direct my energy to what mattered, raising our daughter in the best possible way. You did an incredible job, he said with sincere admiration. Cecilia is extraordinary. A comfortable silence settled between them, as it hadn't in a long time. For a brief moment, it was as if the years hadn't passed, as if they were still those young lovers from a decade ago. The DNA test will be ready tomorrow, Robert commented, breaking the silence, although I already know the result. I know too, Julia replied. I always knew. The next morning, while Julia underwent a battery of tests to define her treatment protocol, Robert took Cecilia for a walk in the clinic gardens. The girl walked beside him, her cane gliding smoothly along the paved path. How do you know where you're going? Robert asked, genuinely curious. I feel the different textures on the ground. I hear the sounds. I smell the scents, Cecilia explained. Every place has its own voice, you know, like a song only I can hear. That's incredible, Robert admired. Grandma used to say that God closes a door but opens a window. When I lost my sight, I gained other ways of seeing. Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. Your grandmother seemed to be a very wise woman. She was, Cecilia confirmed. And stubborn too, just like Mommy. The girl paused. And like you, from what she said. Robert chuckled softly. I guess she was right. They reached a bench under a large cherry plum tree. Robert described to Cecilia the surrounding flowers, the colors of the sky, the birds flying among the trees. The girl absorbed everything with fascination. "Robert," she said after a while, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you my father?" The direct question caught him off guard. He hesitated, thinking about the promise he had made to Julia. "Why do you ask that?" "Because I feel it," Cecilia replied simply, "and because I heard Mommy crying last night, talking about it with Aunt Lucy." Robert took a deep breath. He couldn't lie to her, not after so many lies that had already shaped their lives. "Yes, Cecilia, everything indicates that I am your father." The girl smiled, a luminous smile that transformed her face. "I knew it. Your heart beats the same way mine does." A little rushed, as if it's always chasing something. Robert felt tears in his eyes. Something that hadn't happened since his mother's death years ago. "Are you crying?" Cecilia asked, tilting her head as if she could sense the emotional change. "A little," he admitted. "You don't have to be sad," she consoled, finding his hand with surprising precision. "Grandma said that sometimes people take a long time to find each other because the path between them is full of curves." Robert squeezed the small hand holding his. "Your grandmother really had an answer for everything, didn't she?" "Almost everything," Cecilia laughed, "except how to make a chocolate cake that didn't turn out hard as a rock." They both laughed, and at that moment something definitely changed in Robert's heart. A door that had been closed for years finally opened. In Dr. Paul's office, Julia received encouraging news. The new treatment protocol in London had excellent chances of success in her case. "You are an ideal candidate," the doctor explained. "The disease has progressed rapidly, but you are young and your body still responds well. With the right treatment, we can not only stabilize the condition but potentially reverse some of the neurological damage." "When can we start?" she asked, feeling a hope she hadn't allowed herself in months. "I'm organizing everything for next week. We'll need to transport you to London by air to minimize physical stress." Meanwhile, in Arthur's office, Robert received the official DNA test result. 99.998% probability of paternity, the lawyer informed, handing him the envelope. "There's no doubt, Robert, Cecilia is your daughter." Robert nodded, already expecting this result. "And what about the investigation into Camille?" "Worse than we imagined," Arthur replied, opening a folder. "She not only falsified your fertility tests, she also intercepted all of Julia's attempts to contact you after the breakup. There are records of payments to a private investigator who forged the photos and messages you received at the time." "My God," Robert murmured, "there's more. In the last 2 days, after you confronted her, she tried to access practically all your assets. Fortunately, we managed to block most of the attempts. But she did manage to transfer about $2 million to an account in the Cayman Islands." "The money doesn't matter to me," Robert said. "What worries me is how far she might go to protect herself." "Are Julia and Cecilia safe?" "I've reinforced security at the clinic," Arthur assured, "and I've initiated legal proceedings. Against Camille, she'll receive the notification today." In the apartment attached to the clinic, Cecilia was practicing Braille reading when Julia returned from her exams. "How was your outing with Robert?" Julia asked, sitting beside her daughter. "It was fun," Cecilia replied. "He told me about the flowers and the birds, and he explained how his companies work." Julia smiled. "He was always passionate about business." "Mommy," Cecilia hesitated for a moment. "I asked him if he's my father, and he said yes." Julia froze. What?" "Don't be mad at him," Cecilia hurried to say. "I was the one who insisted, and I already knew anyway." Julia took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. "How did you know?" "I heard you talking with Aunt Lucy, and besides, Grandma always talked about him. She said that one day he would come to find us." Julia hugged her daughter, feeling simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. "I'm not mad, my love, just surprised." "You still like him, don't you?" Cecilia asked, with the typical frankness of children. "Your heart beats differently when he's around, I can hear it." Julia didn't know what to answer. Yes, there were still feelings, wounded, buried under years of resentment and pain, but still alive. However, she couldn't allow herself to dream. Her priority was the treatment and ensuring Cecilia was well cared for, in case... "It's complicated, honey," she finally replied. "Adults sometimes take a long time to understand what they feel. Grandma used to say that grown-up hearts are like old chests, full of locks on the outside, but empty inside if there's no love." Julia laughed, despite the tears that threatened to fall. Your grandmother and her sayings, she always had one for every situation. That night, Robert returned to the clinic, bringing some Braille books he had specially ordered for Cecilia. He found the girl sleeping and Julia on the balcony, observing the city lights. "Sorry for being here so late," he said. "I brought some gifts for Cecilia." "Thank you," Julia replied, indicating the chair beside her. "She'll love them. She loves to read." Robert sat down, placing the books on the table. "She told me you talked about me being her father." Julia nodded. "It's all right. She already knew anyway. My daughter is very perceptive for her age." "Our daughter," Robert corrected gently. Julia looked at him, studying his face. He had changed in these 10 years. Some wrinkles had appeared around his eyes. The hair at his temples was starting to grey, but his gaze was still the same, determined, intense, capable of making her feel like the only person in the world when it rested on her. "I received good news from the doctor today," she commented, looking away to the illuminated city below. "The treatment in London has good chances of working." "That's wonderful," Robert said, genuinely relieved. "I'm already organizing everything. The apartment there is ready, the medical team is on alert. We'll go. Next week." "We'll go?" "If you allow it, I'd like to accompany you," he explained. "I have a branch office in London. I can work from there for a while." Julia felt something stir within her, a hope she dared not name. "You don't have to do that, Robert. You're already doing so much by paying for the treatment." "I'm not doing it out of obligation," he replied, leaning closer. "I'm doing it because I want to be present, for Cecilia, and for you." Robert's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Arthur. "Robert, we need to talk," the lawyer said, his voice tense. Camille received the notification and didn't react well. She made some worrying threats. "What kind of threats?" Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "She said that if you go ahead with the lawsuit, she'll make sure everyone loses. She specifically mentioned that meddling blind girl." Robert paled. "She threatened Cecilia?" "Not directly, but the insinuation was clear. I've already alerted the clinic's security, but I think you should consider moving up the trip to London." Upon hanging up, Robert found Julia watching him with concern. "What happened?" she asked. Robert hesitated. He didn't want to alarm her, but he also couldn't hide the truth. "Camille isn't handling the situation well. I think we should move up the trip to London." "Did she make any threats?" "Nothing concrete," Robert tried to reassure her, "but I prefer to be safe. We can leave tomorrow if the doctor authorizes it." Julia nodded, fear evident in her eyes. "I'll wake Cecilia and start packing our things." As Julia went to her daughter's room, Robert made another call, this time to his head of security. "James, I need reinforced security at St. Clair's Clinic immediately. And prepare. The private jet for tomorrow morning. Destination London." Across town in a luxurious bar in Knightsbridge, Camille drank her third whiskey, her face a mask of controlled fury. Beside her, a discreet-looking man awaited instructions. "I want to know everything," she ordered. "Where they're going, when they're leaving, who's going with them?" "I already have someone infiltrated at the clinic," the man replied. "It seems they're planning to go to London. Experimental treatment." Camille smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perfect. If Robert thinks he can discard me like this, after everything I've done for him, he's very mistaken." As Camille's sinister plan took shape in a dark corner of Birmingham, at St. Clair's Clinic, Cecilia woke up to movement in the room. Sensing the tension in the air, she asked in a sleepy voice, "Mommy, is everything all right?" "Yes, my love," Julia replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "Just a change of plans. We're traveling to London tomorrow, earlier than we expected." "Is Robert coming with us?" "Yes, he is." Cecilia smiled, still half asleep. That's good. I always wanted to see London with both of you. Julia kissed her daughter's forehead, a single tear running down her face. How to explain to an 8-year-old child that life rarely follows the path we desire? That sometimes the simplest dreams, like having a united family, could be the hardest to achieve. Outside the room, Robert watched the scene, his heart heavy with a mixture of love, fear, and determination. After 10 years lost in lies, he had finally found the truth, and he would do anything to protect it. 20 minutes later, the armored car stopped at the emergency entrance of King's College Hospital. Robert and Julia quickly entered, accompanied by 2 discreet but attentive security guards. In the lobby, they found James, who was waiting for them with a grave expression. "Where is she?" Robert asked immediately. "She was last seen on the 5th floor in the neurology wing," James replied. "Hospital security is sweeping, but it's a large building with many exits." "And Dr. Henry?" "He's already been alerted. He's personally checking the entire treatment protocol to ensure nothing has been altered." Julia felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that someone could sabotage her treatment, her only real chance of improvement, was terrifying. "We need to find her," Robert said, his face tense with worry. "If she managed to access the protocol—" "We'll split up," James suggested. "There are cameras in almost every corridor. If she's still in the building, we'll find her." While Robert followed James to the hospital's security center, Julia decided to look for Dr. Henry. She needed to hear from him that her treatment was safe. Accompanied by one of the security guards, she headed to the 5th floor. The corridor was quiet at that hour of the night, with only a few nurses making rounds. Turning a corner, Julia almost collided with a blonde woman in a white lab coat who was hurriedly leaving a room. For a brief moment their eyes met. The woman seemed surprised, almost startled, and immediately averted her face, quickening her pace in the opposite direction. Julia stopped, watching her walk away. There was something familiar about that woman, something in her elegant bearing and determined stride that triggered an alert in her mind. "Wait," she called, suddenly understanding. "You're Camille, aren't you?" The woman paused for an instant but didn't turn around. Then she continued walking even faster. "It's her," Julia said to the security guard. "That woman in the lab coat." The security guard immediately activated his communicator. "Suspect located, north corridor of the 5th floor, moving towards the emergency stairs." Julia, driven by a mixture of fear and anger, began to follow Camille. She couldn't let her escape, not after everything she had done. "Madam, please stay back," the security guard requested, trying to intercept her. But Julia was determined. She quickened her pace, ignoring the sudden dizziness she felt, one of the symptoms of the disease she had learned to recognize. "She was leaving the medication preparation room," she alerted, pointing to the half-open door. At that moment, Camille briefly turned around. Her eyes met Julia's once more, cold, calculating, but also cornered. Then she pushed an equipment cart backward, blocking the corridor, and ran towards the emergency exit. The security guard managed to bypass the obstacle and continued the pursuit while Julia entered the room Camille had just left. The room was in order, but something caught her attention. An open vial on the counter next to a used syringe. Her heart raced. This was the laboratory where the medications for her treatment were being prepared. In the security center, Robert watched the monitoring screens when the alert came in. 5th floor north corridor, the camera operator informed. He quickly identified Camille in the images, running down the emergency stairs. "She's going down to the 3rd floor, he observed. "We already have teams positioned at all exits," James assured. But Robert wasn't listening. On another screen, he saw Julia entering the medication preparation room alone. What is she doing in there? Where is the security guard who should be with her? "Probably chasing Camille," James replied. "I'm going there," Robert decided, getting up hastily. "Continue the search for Camille." Julia, meanwhile, carefully examined the room. Her years working as a pharmacist before her illness worsened had given her enough knowledge to understand the gravity of the situation. Picking up the vial, she checked the label. It was one of the components of the monoclonal antibody cocktail that would be part of her treatment. The door burst open, startling her. It was Dr. Henry. "Julia, what are you doing here?" "Doctor, I believe someone tried to interfere with the protocol," she explained, showing him the vial and syringe. "The woman who left here—" "Camille Vasconcelos," the doctor completed, approaching to examine the material. "Security just alerted me. Did you see her tampering with this?" "Not directly, but she left here in a hurry," Julia replied. "And this vial shouldn't be open, should it?" The doctor frowned, worried. "Definitely not. I'll order a full analysis of all the material to ensure nothing was contaminated or altered." At that moment, Robert entered the room, relief evident on his face at seeing Julia. "Are you all right? When I saw you were alone here." "I'm fine," she reassured him. "But we found something worrying." While Dr. Henry explained the situation, Robert's communicator rang. "Sir, we intercepted Camille Vasconcelos at the parking lot exit," James informed. "She's being detained by hospital security." Robert and Julia exchanged a look. "I'll talk to her," he decided. "I'm coming with you," Julia insisted. On the ground floor, in a small security room, Camille was sitting, her arms crossed defensively. Seeing Robert and Julia enter, her face adopted an expression of disdain. "The perfect couple," she commented sarcastically. "What did you do, Camille?" Robert asked directly. "What did you try to do with Julia's treatment?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, looking away. "I was just visiting a friend who was admitted." "Dressed as a hospital employee?" Julia questioned, "with access to the medication preparation room." Camille stared at her coldly. "You really think it's going to work, don't you? This whole charade, Robert funding your expensive treatment, playing the devoted father to a girl who probably isn't even his daughter." "The DNA test has already confirmed it," Robert replied. "Cecilia is my daughter, and you always knew that. That's why you falsified my fertility tests 10 years ago. And now you're willing to sabotage medical treatment," Julia added, incredulous. "Do you realize the gravity of this?" Something in Camille's gaze changed, a flicker of insecurity, perhaps even fear. "I didn't do anything," she insisted, "and even if I had, you can't prove it." "Security cameras prove you were in a restricted area, using false credentials," Robert countered. "And we still have to analyze what you might have done with the medications." Camille paled slightly, but maintained her defiant posture. "You won't go through with this, Robert. Think of the scandal, the impact on your business." "I've thought about it," he replied calmly, "and I've decided that nothing is more important than my family's safety." The word family seemed to hit Camille like a physical blow. Her face contorted into an expression of fury and hurt. "Family?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. 10 years by your side, helping to build your empire, and you discard me as soon as this woman reappears with a convenient story." "You lied to me," Robert replied. "You manipulated my life, deprived me of my daughter, and now you're trying to prevent Julia's treatment. There's no coming back from this, Camille." Hospital security entered the room, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Miss Vasconcelos," one of them said, "the hospital administration is filing a complaint against you for trespassing in a restricted area, using false credentials, and possible tampering with medical materials. You'll need to accompany us to the police station." Camille looked at Robert, despair finally breaking her facade of control. "You can't do this to me." "I didn't do this," he replied. "They were your own choices." As Camille was led away by the police, Julia touched Robert's arm. "Let's go back to the apartment. We need to check if Cecilia is all right." On the way back, Robert received a call from Dr. Henry. "We've done a preliminary analysis of the material," the doctor informed. "It seems there was an attempt to alter the dosage of one of the components, but we detected it in time. There will be no impact on your treatment, Julia. We'll start tomorrow as planned." Upon hanging up, Julia took a deep breath, relieved. She really tried to sabotage my chance to get better. "But she didn't succeed," Robert reminded her, holding her hand. "And now she'll have to face the consequences." Back at the apartment, they found Nancy in the living room waiting anxiously. "Is everything all right?" Cecilia fell asleep a little while ago, asking about you. Everything is all right now, Julia assured. The treatment will begin tomorrow as planned. And Camille? Nancy asked, concerned. Detained, Robert replied. She won't bother us anymore. That night, after Nancy had retired, Robert and Julia remained on the balcony, observing the illuminated city. The silence between them was comfortable, like that of two people who had shared a battle and emerged victorious. Before all this happened, Robert began, looking at her, you were about to tell me something about us. Julia smiled softly. I was going to say that I want to try too. For Cecilia. For us. For the family we could have been and still can be. Robert moved closer, gently touching her face. This time there were no interruptions when their lips met. A gentle kiss, laden with promises, with overcome regrets, with renewed hope. When they separated, Julia had tears in her eyes. I was so afraid of losing this chance, she confessed, not just for the treatment, but for the three of us together. You won't lose it, Robert assured. I'll be by your side every step of the way. The next day at 8 a.m., Julia entered the treatment room at King's College Hospital, accompanied by Robert. Cecilia stayed in the apartment with Nancy, making animated plans to decorate her new room in Birmingham for when they returned after the treatment. Dr. Henry explained each step of the procedure, while the team prepared the magnetic stimulation equipment and nurses connected the IV for the monoclonal antibody infusion. Are you ready? The doctor asked, smiling encouragingly. Julia nodded, squeezing Robert's hand. More ready than ever. As the treatment began, Robert felt an overwhelming emotion. 10 years ago, he had allowed a lie to destroy what was most precious to him. Now, he had a second chance, not just with Julia, but with the daughter he didn't know he had. Life had given him a painful lesson about the value of truth, forgiveness, and especially the love that overcomes barriers of time and resentment. Looking at Julia, he silently promised never to let anything separate them again. Outside, the sun shone over London, promising a new day, a new beginning. For Robert, Julia, and little Cecilia, the future finally seemed illuminated by possibilities, no longer shadowed by past lies. Meanwhile, in a small room at the police station, Camille Vasconcelos faced the reality of her choices. The empire of lies she had built crumbled around her, leaving only the emptiness of a life dedicated to maintaining a charade. Perhaps, she reflected bitterly, this was her true punishment, to witness the happiness she had tried to destroy flourish despite her efforts. 6 weeks had passed since the beginning of the treatment. Spring had arrived in London, covering the city's parks with an explosion of colours that Cecilia couldn't see but felt through the aromas that filled the air, and the detailed descriptions Robert gave during their daily walks. In the apartment, in Kensington, now transformed into a true home, the small family had created a routine that adjusted to everyone's needs. In the morning, Robert worked remotely, managing his businesses through video conferences, while Julia rested after her treatment sessions. In the afternoon, they usually went for a walk in the park or visited a cultural site adapted for the visually impaired, always with Cecilia between them, her white cane gliding with increasing confidence across the ground of a city she was learning to know. On that sunny September morning, Dr. Henry received Julia and Robert in his office, his face lit up by a smile that already anticipated good news. The results are impressive, he said, showing comparative images of Julia's brain before and after the treatment. The progression of the disease was not only halted, but we observed significant regeneration in areas we believed were permanently compromised. Robert held Julia's hand tightly, feeling emotion choke his voice. It means the protocol worked better than we expected, the doctor completed. Julia, your response to the treatment is among the most positive we've ever recorded. Symptoms should continue to regress in the coming weeks, and with appropriate physical therapy, there's a strong chance of recovering most of your mobility. Julia covered her face with her hands, tears streaming between her fingers. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of renewed hope, an absolute contrast to the tears of despair she had shed so many times since the diagnosis, when she believed her time with Cecilia would be cruelly shortened by the disease. "And what about maintenance?" Robert asked, always practical even in moments of intense emotion. "Will we need to continue the treatment?" "Yes, but on a much smaller scale," Dr. Henry explained. "Monthly sessions during the first year, then quarterly, and of course constant monitoring. But the most important thing has been achieved. We halted the progression of the disease at the critical moment." On the way back to the apartment, Julia remained silent, looking out the car window as London passed by. Robert respected her moment of introspection, knowing how much that prognosis meant. It wasn't just a matter of recovered health. It was the promise of a future that, until a few weeks ago, seemed impossible. "What are you thinking about?" he asked finally, when they stopped at a red light. Julia turned to him, her eyes still bright with unshed tears. "How quickly life changes. 2 months ago I was preparing for the worst, organizing documents, recording videos for Cecilia to watch after I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "And now? Now I have to learn to plan a future again," she replied with a shy smile. "It's scary in a way." Robert brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. "Don't plan alone. We're in this together, remember?" When they arrived at the apartment, they found Cecilia and Nancy in the kitchen, making chocolate fudge balls. The sweet smell of chocolate filled the air, creating a cozy atmosphere that contrasted with the tension of recent months. "Mommy, Robert, we're making a surprise for you," Cecilia announced, her face and hands splattered with chocolate. "I can see that," Julia laughed, approaching to kiss the top of her daughter's head. "And it looks delicious." "It's to celebrate," the girl explained, carefully rolling another fudge ball. "Nancy told me today was the last important exam." Robert exchanged a look with Julia, both impressed by their daughter's perception. "And you're right, little one," he said, taking a still warm fudge ball from the pan. "We have a lot to celebrate." While Cecilia continued her culinary production under Nancy's supervision, Robert led Julia to the balcony, where they could talk in privacy. "What are we going to tell her?" Julia asked. "The truth," Robert replied simply. "That you're getting better, that the treatment worked, and that we can start thinking about going back to Birmingham if you want." "Birmingham," Julia murmured, as if testing the sound of those words. "It feels like an eternity since we left there." "A lot has changed in just 6 weeks," Robert agreed, "especially us." It was true. Their relationship, initially rebuilt on the fragile foundations of Robert's guilt and Julia's need, had transformed into something much deeper. Daily life together, the challenges faced, the shared love for Cecilia. Everything had contributed to creating a connection neither of them believed was possible again. "I've been thinking a lot about our future," Robert said, turning to face her. "About how I want it to be." "And how do you want it to be?" Julia asked, feeling her heart quicken. Robert smiled, that smile that still had the power to make her feel like the only woman in the world. "I want us to be a real family, not just for Cecilia, but for us, because despite everything that happened, I never stopped loving you, Julia. I tried. God knows how I tried, but it was always you." Julia felt her eyes well up again. How many tears could a person shed in a single day? "Robert, You don't have to answer now," he interrupted gently. "I know we still have a lot to rebuild, a lot of trust to regain." "It's not that," she replied, touching his face tenderly. "It's just, I'm scared of giving myself completely and losing everything again. I wouldn't survive it a second time." "Neither would I," Robert confessed, "but we can try one day at a time. No rush, no pressure, just together." At that moment, Cecilia appeared on the balcony, her hands already clean of chocolate. "Mummy, the fudge balls are ready. Come and try." Julia smiled at her daughter, extending her hand to guide her back to the kitchen. "Let's go then. We can't let these fudge balls get cold, can we?" For the rest of the day, they celebrated the good news simply. Fudge balls, stories, laughter. Robert watched mother and daughter interacting, noticing small gestures, similar expressions, identical ways of tilting their heads when they were concentrated. It was fascinating to discover these connections, these genetic traits that manifested despite the forced separation. That night, After Cecilia had fallen asleep, Robert found Julia in the apartment's library, leafing through an old book she had brought from Birmingham, one of the few personal belongings she had managed to bring in their hasty departure. "What are you reading?" he asked, sitting beside her on the sofa. "I'm not really reading," she admitted, showing him the book. It was a photo album. "Just reminiscing about some moments." Robert examined the photos with interest. They were images of Cecilia at different ages, a baby with big, curious eyes, a toddler clinging to a toy, a little older, learning to use her cane, more recently, smiling beside her grandmother. "She always smiles the same way," he observed, gently touching one of the photos, with the left corner of her mouth going up first. "Just like you," Julia replied. "It was one of the first things I noticed when she was born, that crooked smile that was always your trademark." Robert felt a pang in his chest, thinking about all the moments he had missed, how he could have been present in each of those photographs. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there," he murmured. "It wasn't your fault," Julia consoled, closing the album. "We were both victims of an elaborate lie." "Still, I can't help but think about what could have been." Julia took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Let's focus on what can be from now on. That's what I've been trying to do since I received the diagnosis. Every day is a new chance." Robert smiled, admiring the strength of that woman who, even facing a devastating disease, managed to maintain a positive outlook. "You were always wiser than me." "Not wiser," she corrected with a smile. "Just more patient. You were always brilliant, Robert, just a little too rushed for your own good." They laughed together, and for a moment it was as if the 10 years of separation had never existed. "About going back to Birmingham," Julia began, changing the subject. "I think it's the right decision. Cecilia misses her school, her friends." "We can go when you feel ready," Robert assured. "There's no rush." "Actually, I already feel ready," she admitted. "Doctor, Henry said I can continue the maintenance treatment there, with the team at Royal Crescent Hospital." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "We need to think about living arrangements. Your apartment is too small for the three of us, and my house—" He hesitated. "Well, it has too many memories of Camille there." "We could look for a new place," Julia suggested, "a complete fresh start." The idea pleased Robert. A new home, without ghosts of the past, where they could build new memories together. "I'll ask James to start looking for options." The next morning, Robert woke up early and went to Cecilia's room. The girl was already awake, listening to an audiobook through the installed system. "Good morning, little one," he greeted, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," she replied with a yawn. "I was dreaming of Grandma." She was smiling. Robert felt a pang in his heart, thinking of Grandma Constance, the woman he had never met, but who had ensured he found his daughter. "Your grandmother must be very happy now, seeing that we are all together." "She always said that would happen," Cecilia commented naturally. "She used to say that some people take a long time to find their way back home, but they always do." "Your grandmother was very wise," Robert smiled, still marveling at his daughter's maturity and perception. "Robert," Cecilia said, suddenly serious, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything." "Are you and Mommy going to get married?" The direct question caught Robert off guard. "Well, we haven't discussed that yet." "But you'd like to, wouldn't you?" the girl insisted. "Grandma used to say that when two people love each other, they should stay together forever." Robert smiled, touched by the simplicity of child logic. "Yes, I would very much like to, but it's a decision that your mother and I need to make together when we're both ready." Cecilia seemed satisfied with the answer. "I think you're already ready. You just haven't realized it yet." During breakfast, Robert received a call from Arthur, who had remained in Birmingham handling legal matters. "Good news," the lawyer announced. "The judge granted shared custody of Cecilia. Her birth certificate will be amended to include you as her father." "Excellent," Robert replied, feeling immense relief. Even with the DNA test confirming paternity, there had always been the fear of legal complications, especially after Camille's actions. "As for her," Arthur continued as if reading his thoughts, "she accepted the agreement. She renounced any claim to the company's assets in exchange for the withdrawal of the more serious criminal charges. She will still face charges for using false documents and trespassing, but she probably won't get actual prison time. Robert felt contradictory emotions upon hearing this news. Part of him wanted Camille to face severe consequences for her actions, especially for attempting to sabotage Julia's treatment. But another part felt pity for the woman who had so distorted her own life in the pursuit of control and power. "It's done then," he finally said. "We can move forward." "There's one more thing," Arthur added. "I found a house that might interest you. Richmond Hill, view of the Chiltern Hills, large plot, fully adaptable to Cecilia's needs." "Sounds perfect," Robert replied. "Send the details. If it's suitable, we can close the deal even before we return." Upon hanging up, he found Julia looking at him with curiosity. "Good news?" "Great," he confirmed, sharing what Arthur had informed him, "and we might have found our new home." Julia's eyes sparkled with anticipation. The idea of a new home, a true home for her small family, was more than she had dared to dream months ago. "When can we see it?" "Arthur will send photos and videos today," Robert replied. "But if we like it, we can go to Birmingham this weekend to see it in person." The possibility of returning to her hometown filled Julia with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Birmingham held so many memories, some painful, others precious. It was the city where she had grown up, where she had met and fallen in love with Robert, where Cecilia had been born. Returning now with the family she had almost lost felt like closing a cycle. The following days were filled with preparations. Robert, always efficient, organized everything: the private jet for their return, the medical transfer to Royal Crescent Hospital, the visit to the potential new house, and even an interview with a specialized school for Cecilia, which offered advanced programs for visually impaired children. On the eve of the trip, while Cecilia and Nancy finalized their packing, Robert found Julia on the balcony, her favorite spot in the London apartment. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that she observed with a serene expression. "I'll miss this view," she commented, noticing his presence. "We can come back whenever you want," Robert replied, stopping beside her. "After all, I have business here too." Julia smiled, turning to face him. "You know, I've been thinking a lot these past few days, about new beginnings, second chances." "And have you come to any conclusion?" "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but determined. "I want to try, Robert. I want us to be a real family, not just for Cecilia, but for us. Because despite everything, I never stopped loving you either." Robert felt his heart race, as if he were again the young man who had fallen desperately in love with Julia years ago. Without words, he simply pulled her to him, kissing her with all the emotion contained during those weeks of cautious cohabitation. When they separated, both were breathless, like teenagers after a first kiss. "I waited so long to hear that," he confessed. "I was scared," Julia admitted, "of trusting again, of getting hurt, but I realized I'm even more afraid of not trying, of wasting this second chance life has given us." Robert brushed a strand of hair from her face, memorizing every detail. "I promise that this time I'll do everything differently. You and Cecilia will always be my priorities." At that moment, as if invoked by the mention of her name, Cecilia appeared at the balcony door. "Are you dating?" she asked directly, with the typical frankness of children. Robert and Julia exchanged an amused look. "Yes," he replied, "your mother and I are dating. Is that okay with you?" Cecilia's face lit up with a radiant smile. "Finally! Grandma will be so happy in heaven." The next day they embarked for Birmingham. The journey was smooth, with Cecilia excited by the adventure of flying again, filling the plane with curious questions about clouds, turbulence, and why ears popped during takeoff. Upon landing at Birmingham Airport, they were met by Arthur, who was waiting with an executive car. The lawyer immediately noticed the change in the dynamic between Robert and Julia, the way he kept his hand on her waist as he guided her through the lobby, the exchanged smiles, the intimacy in small gestures. "I see London was good for you," he commented discreetly to Robert as they headed to the car. "It was transformative," Robert replied with a smile, "in every sense." Their first stop was Royal Crescent Hospital, where Julia had an appointment scheduled with Dr. Luke Foster, the neurologist who would continue her treatment. The doctor, who had already received all records from Dr. Henry, was optimistic. The London protocol achieved impressive results, he commented, analyzing the recent exams. We will continue along the same lines, with some adaptations for the maintenance phase. Satisfied with the smooth medical transition, they went to see the house Arthur had found. Located in the Richmond Hill neighborhood on the border between Birmingham and a nearby affluent town, the property was in a gated community, surrounded by native vegetation and with a privileged view of the Chiltern Hills. "It's even more beautiful in person," Robert commented as they spotted the house, a contemporary construction with clean lines and large windows that took advantage of the spectacular view. The real estate agent who was waiting for them showed each room with enthusiasm. The house was spacious with 4 suites, an office, a large living room with a double-height ceiling, a gourmet kitchen and an outdoor area, with a pool and garden. "What do you think?" Robert asked Julia as they watched the sunset from the main balcony. "It's perfect," she replied, moved. "I can imagine us here, building a life." Cecilia explored the spaces with her cane, accompanied by Nancy. "Can the room with the door to the garden be mine?" she asked excitedly. "If that's what you want, it will be yours," Robert assured. That same afternoon, they closed the deal. The house would be theirs in 15 days, enough time to make the necessary adaptations for Cecilia and decorate it according to the family's tastes. They stayed temporarily in a luxury hotel in the city centre. Despite the comfort, there was an atmosphere of impermanence, of transition, something appropriate for the moment they were living, between the past that was behind them and the future they were building together. Over the next 2 weeks, they immersed themselves in preparations for their new life. Robert reorganized his professional schedule to spend more time in Birmingham, delegating responsibilities at the London branch. Julia began her maintenance treatment sessions and, encouraged by the doctors, started to consider the possibility of resuming her career as a pharmacist, interrupted by her illness. Cecilia, in turn, was enrolled in St. Raphael's Institute, a school specializing in education for the visually impaired, where she underwent tests that confirmed her above-average intelligence and special aptitude for music. "She has perfect pitch," the music teacher explained, impressed. "It's a rare ability, even among professional musicians." Robert didn't hide his pride upon hearing about his daughter's talents. He immediately arranged for a piano for the new house and hired a private teacher to develop Cecilia's musical gift. On the eve of the move to the new house, Robert prepared a special surprise. He took Julia and Cecilia to dinner at the Gilded Spoon, the same restaurant where he had his first date with Julia almost 15 years ago. "Do you remember this place?" he asked, as they were led to their table. Julia looked around, recognizing the sophisticated atmosphere with soft lighting and ambient music. "How could I forget? It was here that you spilled red wine on your white shirt and pretended you weren't embarrassed." Robert laughed, recalling the moment. "I was so nervous. You were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I was just a young businessman trying to look more confident than I really was." After the delicious dinner, when dessert was served, Robert surprised them again. Instead of the expected sweet, the waiter brought a small velvet box on the tray. "What is this?" Julia asked, confused. Cecilia, sensing the change in atmosphere, smiled. She knew exactly what was happening. Robert took the box and, to Julia's surprise, knelt beside the table. "Julia Oliver," he began, his voice slightly trembling. 15 years ago, we met by chance in a bookstore at Westfield Mall. You were looking for a book on botany, and I pretended to understand the subject just to prolong our conversation." Julia laughed, remembering the moment. "We fell in love, planned a life together, and then lost 10 years because of lies and manipulations," he continued. "But fate, or perhaps your mother's persistence, gave us a second chance. These last few months have shown me that you always were and always will be the love of my life." Opening the box, he revealed a delicate ring with a solitaire sapphire, Julia's favorite stone. "I don't want to lose another day. Julia, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears streamed down her face while Cecilia squeezed her hands in anticipation. "Yes," Julia replied with a choked voice. "Yes, Robert." The entire restaurant applauded when he placed the ring on her finger and sealed their engagement with a passionate kiss. Cecilia, feeling the emotion in the air, smiled radiantly. "Are we a real family now?" she asked when her parents turned their attention to her. "We always were, darling," Julia replied, hugging her daughter. "But now it's official." The next day they finally moved into their new house. Each room had been carefully prepared, combining Robert's elegant taste with Julia's more welcoming style. Cecilia's room was special, with walls in vibrant colors, even if she couldn't see them, an integrated audio system, tactile markings everywhere, and a direct door to the garden, where a small sensory labyrinth had been built, especially for her. On their first night in the new house after Cecilia had fallen asleep, Robert found Julia on the balcony, watching the city lights in the distance, with the Chiltern Hills silhouetted against the starry sky. "Happy?" he asked, embracing her from behind. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, turning in his arms. "If someone had told me 3 months ago that we'd be here now planning a wedding, with my health recovered and Cecilia finally knowing her father." "It feels like a dream," Robert completed. "But it's real. All of this is real, Julia." They kissed under the starry sky of the Midlands, sealing a silent promise never again to let lies or misunderstandings separate them. In the following months, life took on its own rhythm, punctuated by small daily joys and significant achievements. Julia's treatment continued to progress positively, with doctors increasingly optimistic about her full recovery. Cecilia quickly adapted to her new school, making friends and demonstrating impressive abilities, not only in music, but also in mathematics and literature. Robert reorganized his businesses to be more present in the family's daily life, delegating responsibilities and finding a new balance between work and personal life, something he had never considered important, before reuniting with Julia and meeting Cecilia. The wedding was scheduled for the beginning of the next spring, an intimate ceremony in the gardens of their own home. Julia chose a simple but elegant dress and insisted that Cecilia have a special role in the ceremony. "I want her to play the piano during the entrance," she explained to Robert. "It will be more meaningful than any traditional music." When the big day arrived, everything was perfect. The garden had been transformed with natural flowers in shades of blue and white, Julia's favorites. Selected guests, only close friends and family, waited under a canopy of delicate lights. Cecilia, dressed in a light blue dress, sat at the piano that had been specially installed for the occasion. Her fingers moved confidently over the keys, playing an original composition she had created for her parents' wedding, a sweet melody that spoke of separation, reunion, and renewed love without needing words. As Julia walked towards Robert, to the sound of the music played by her daughter, there wasn't a single dry eye among the guests. It was more than a wedding. It was the celebration of a love that had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, of a family that had found its way back home. During the exchange of vows, Robert included a special promise for Cecilia. "I promise to be not only a devoted husband, but a present father, who will make up for every lost day with 1,000 days of love and care." After the ceremony, during the small reception, Cecilia surprised everyone by showcasing another talent. She sang a song she had learned especially for the occasion, her crystalline voice filling the garden with a moving version of Watercolor, the song Julia used to sing to her before bedtime. Arthur, who had become a close family friend, approached Robert during the party. "It's amazing how life comes full circle," he commented. "Less than a year ago, you were a lonely man living a lie, and now I'm the happiest man in the world," Robert completed, watching Julia dance with Cecilia, both laughing at some private joke. Months later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Robert was working in his home office when he heard a commotion coming from the garden. Curious, he approached the window and saw Julia and Cecilia practicing with the cane, apparently trying some new mobility exercise. Suddenly, Cecilia dropped the cane and took a few steps alone, with her arms outstretched, while Julia watched her with a mixture of apprehension and pride. The girl stumbled slightly but recovered and continued, a determined smile on her face. Robert felt his heart warm as he witnessed that small achievement. It was like this now, days filled with simple moments that together composed an extraordinary life. That night, As Julia braided Cecilia's hair before bed, the girl asked a question that caught them both by surprise. "Mommy, can I call Robert Dad?" Julia looked at Robert, who was standing at the bedroom door, observing the scene. "Of course you can, my love. He is your father." "I know," Cecilia replied, "but I never called him that. It was always Robert." Robert approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I would love for you to call me Dad, Cecilia. It would be the greatest honor of my life." The girl smiled, extending her arms to hug him. "Good night, Dad," she said, trying out the new word. Robert hugged her tightly, tears silently streaming down his face. "Good night, my little one," he replied with a choked voice. Later, when they finally retired to the master bedroom, Robert found Julia on the private balcony, watching the full moon shining over the hills. "She called me Dad," he commented, still emotional. "I heard," Julia smiled. "It's what she wanted for a long time, but I think she was waiting for the right moment." Robert embraced his wife, inhaling the soft scent of her hair. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For never giving up, for raising our daughter with so much love, even alone, for giving me a second chance, even after everything." Julia turned to face him, the moonlight reflecting in her eyes. "You know what my mother always said, that true love never dies, it just sleeps sometimes, and that, at the right moment, it always awakens, stronger than before." "Your mother was indeed very wise," Robert smiled. "Yes, she was," Julia agreed, "and she would have loved to see that she was right once again." Embraced under the starry sky of the Midlands, Robert and Julia contemplated the future, not with fear or uncertainty, but with the quiet confidence of those who have faced the worst and discovered that together they could overcome any obstacle. In the quiet house, while her parents talked on the balcony, Cecilia fell asleep with a smile on her lips, dreaming of the adventures she would yet live with her finally complete family. In her dream, Grandma Constance smiled, satisfied to see her last wish fulfilled. The truth had finally prevailed, and love, that genuine love she had always known existed between Robert and Julia, had proven stronger than any lie. The family that almost never existed now flourished, building day by day a story that, as Cecilia would say, was even more beautiful than those in the books she read with her sensitive fingers, because it was real, imperfect, and absolutely theirs. 3 years had passed since Robert and Julia's wedding. The house in Richmond Hill had truly become a home, filled with laughter, music, and the unmistakable aroma of cheese bread that Julia had learned to make perfectly, following one of Grandma Constance's old recipes. It was a sunny Sunday morning, typical of the Midlands spring. Robert, now 45, watched from the balcony as Cecilia, now 11, played the violin under the shade of a cherry plum tree. The girl had grown a few inches, her dark hair now longer, tied in an elaborate braid. Her musical talent had blossomed extraordinarily, surprising even her most experienced teachers at the Birmingham Conservatory of Music, where she had been studying for 2 years. "She's improved so much," Julia commented, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Robert and sat beside him in the double rocking chair, a gift he had bought for their first wedding anniversary. "It's impressive," Robert agreed, accepting the coffee. "Professor Smith said she has the potential to perform with the symphony orchestra next semester." Julia smiled, proud. At 42, she was more beautiful than ever. The treatment for multiple sclerosis had been an absolute success, exceeding even the most optimistic expectations of the doctors. Although she still needed regular follow-ups, she lived a practically normal life, having even resumed her career as a pharmacist, now working part-time on a research project at Royal Crescent Hospital itself. "I received an email from Nancy yesterday," Julia commented, after a moment of comfortable silence. "She's loving her work at the new NGO." Nancy, who had remained part of the family even after Julia fully recovered her independence, now directed a non-governmental organization founded by Robert, dedicated to providing experimental treatments for multiple sclerosis patients who lacked financial means. "We're about to open the 3rd clinic," Robert informed with satisfaction. "This time in Liverpool. We already have over 200 patients benefiting from the program." It was a form of giving back that, They found, using Robert's resources and influence to help others who faced the same battle Julia had won. The Constance Oliver Foundation had become a national reference in just a few years, thanks to the couple's dedication and the exceptional team they had assembled, starting with Nancy. The sound of the violin ceased, and Cecilia came walking towards the balcony, moving with the ease of someone who perfectly knew every inch of the path. She no longer used her cane as frequently at home. Her spatial memory was impressive. "Dad, Mom, what did you think?" she asked, climbing the balcony steps. "Beautiful, my love," Julia replied. "The best interpretation of Bach I've ever heard," Robert added. Cecilia smiled, that same crooked smile she had inherited from her father. "It's for next week's performance at school. We're going to play for the children at the orphanage." Robert felt his chest swell with pride. His daughter's generosity was something that always moved him. Since she was little, even facing her own difficulties, Cecilia always thought about how to help others. Recently, she had started a project at school teaching music to other visually impaired children. "By the way," Cecilia said, sitting on the balcony step, "Clara sent me a message. She passed the first phase of the competition." Clara was Cecilia's best friend, a girl she had met at St. Raphael's Institute and who dreamed of becoming a writer. Robert had sponsored her participation in a national young literature competition. "That's wonderful," Julia commented. "We need to invite her for dinner to celebrate." "I already invited her," Cecilia replied with a mischievous smile. "For Friday. I hope you don't mind." Robert and Julia exchanged amused glances. Their daughter's social ease always surprised them. It was as if her blindness, instead of limiting her, had broadened her ability to connect with people on a deeper level. "Of course we don't mind," Robert assured. "I love Clara." At that moment, the house intercom rang. It was Arthur, coming to have lunch with them, as he did almost every Sunday. The lawyer had become a constant presence in the family, something like an uncle to Cecilia. While Julia went to greet Arthur, Robert remained on the balcony with his daughter. There was something he wanted to talk to her about before the others returned. "Cecilia," he began, "do you remember we talked about the possibility of an experimental surgery for your vision?" The girl nodded, suddenly serious. "Yes, the one they're developing in the United States." "Exactly. Well, I spoke with Dr. Miles yesterday, and he believes you would be an excellent candidate for the procedure. Your specific condition of congenital glaucoma corresponds exactly to the profile they are looking for in this phase of clinical trials." Cecilia was silent for a moment, processing the information. "And what are the chances of it working? Of me seeing?" Robert chose his words carefully. Dr. Miles spoke of approximately a 60% chance of partial vision recovery. It wouldn't be perfect, perhaps more like shadows and some outlines, maybe a little light perception, but it's more than you have now. And the risks? Minimal, according to him. It's a non-invasive procedure, using gene therapy. Even in the worst-case scenario, you would remain as you are now. Cecilia pondered, her fingers tapping lightly against her knee, a habit she had developed when concentrating on something important. "Can I think about it?" she finally asked. "It's just, I don't know if I want to change who I am." Robert felt his heart ache. It was exactly why he loved his daughter so much, her wisdom that seemed to come from a soul much older than her 11 years. "Of course you can, little one," he replied, stroking her hair. "There's no rush. The decision is entirely yours." Cecilia smiled, relieved. "Thank you, Dad." Julia returned with Arthur, who brought a box of sweets from Sylvia's bakery, the family's favorite. The conversation flowed naturally to other topics: plans for summer vacation, Robert's new project to expand his businesses to the north of England, Julia's recent research. Later, when Arthur had left and Cecilia was practicing piano in the music room, Robert found Julia in the office organizing some notes for her project. "I talked to her about the surgery," he commented, sitting in the armchair next to the desk. "And how did it go?" "She asked for time to think. She said she doesn't know if she wants to change who she is." Julia smiled, her eyes shining with contained tears. "Our daughter is incredible, isn't she?" "More than we could imagine," Robert agreed. Sometimes I wonder who teaches whom more. Approaching, Julia sat on her husband's lap, resting her head on his shoulder. You know, in these moments, I feel like my mother is here watching, satisfied that she persisted, that she didn't give up on uniting our family. I'm sure she is, Robert murmured, kissing her gently. And eternal gratitude is little compared to what I feel for Grandma Constance. The sound of the piano filled the house, an original melody Cecilia had composed especially for her parents' upcoming anniversary. On the sheet music, which she had asked for help transcribing, the title was simple, Second Chances. And that was what this family represented, a second chance. For Robert and Julia, who almost lost the love of their lives because of a lie. For Julia, who almost lost the battle against a relentless disease. For Cecilia, who now grew up with the loving presence of both parents after years of knowing only one side of her story. As the sun began to set over the Chiltern Hills, painting the Birmingham sky with shades of orange and pink, Robert hugged Julia a little tighter, silently thanking for every moment, every challenge overcome, every small joy that, together, composed the masterpiece that was their life now. Imperfect, sometimes difficult, but absolutely theirs. And that was all that mattered.